Welcome to Make It, Share It, the podcast where we explore the simple but profound process to overcome fear, doubt, perfectionism, and more enemies of creativity. Make it and share it.
We'll talk to creators of all kinds, from artists and writers to entrepreneurs and inventors, to learn about their creative process, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them by making and sharing.
Whether you're an artist, entrepreneur, or someone who wants to create but feels stuck, this podcast is for you. Creativity, meet courage. All right, welcome back to Make It, Share It, where creativity meets courage. Excited to join you today, and we have a special guest in the house with us, Craig Cunningham.
Hey, Craig.
Howdy.
Of course, joined by Lauren Chandler.
Hey, guys.
And Stephen Cooper.
Hello.
Hey, this episode, we're welcoming Craig Cunningham. I'm going to read his bio, and then we're going to talk and just have a conversation with him. Craig Cunningham is a novelist, poet, and filmmaker who has worked in a variety of professional creative roles over the years. He is the author of the Theology series, A Natural Death, and Freedom Day, among other projects. His most recent book, One Night and 1,000 Years, is a coming-of-age novel about a group of young men who are led through a series of rites of passage their senior year. He is a husband, father, and Waco, Texas native. All right, let's go, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Waco, Texas. A few of us are from, or not from there. Spent some time there. We may get into that. Hey, thanks for joining us, Craig. And yeah, I'd love just to start out as we'll talk about One Night and 1,000 Years in particular on this episode, and you making that and sharing that. But one of the things we want to do and Make It, Share It in these shows is just to start a little bit with back in kind of your formative years, right? So much of who we become later in life is built on those formative years, and in particular, memories that we have that you might call a turning point, just something that happened where the way that we think or live or relate to the world changes. So we'd just love to start there. Like what for you, when you think about where you are today and look back, like what's one of those kind of early memories that you remember that really formed you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It ties to the book. I know we're going to talk about the book at a certain point, but and you say early, but I'm going to go back to 17 because that's really a time when I feel like a lot of things shifted for me. So I grew up in a pretty traditional home, Christian home, great home, love my parents, but was moving through life without a really clear vision of what I wanted to do or an impact I wanted to make. And then at 17, I became part of this group, and it was an unusual group. And this is what the book is about, or it's what it's based on, I should say, and was just invited to, I think back to it, and the phrase that I think of is invited into the adventure of life. And so we had this mentor who was guiding us and really did that for this group of guys. It was 12 senior guys in high school. And he invited us into the adventure of life. And with that came this he handed us a journal and told us to start writing. And I did that. And all this world opened up to me. I started writing for the first time, and that turned into poetry. And then that turned into poetry that I would write for my girlfriend and give it to her. Like it opened this whole world of creativity to me that I had not really experienced before then. And then that's the beginning of a journey of me becoming an artist and like devoting it's been 18 years since then, devoting the next 18 years to writing and to telling stories. And that wouldn't have never happened, I don't think, without that moment, without being handed that journal and being invited to do something that I'd never done before.
Yeah. So was writing like when you were younger or as you went through junior high, was that something that you enjoyed and this unlocked, or that this was the first time?
It was brand new. A lot of writers have that story where they're 10 and they get a typewriter and they always wanted to tell stories. I don't have that story at all. My story really started right then. I was reading a lot at that age, 17, 18. For the first time, I was reading Emerson, Thoreau, C.S. Lewis, Gibran, Thomas Merton, a lot of these kind of big thinkers. And so my mind was already moving in new directions. And then when I was invited to start writing, something just clicked for me. So it was brand new at 17 to write and to even think of myself as somebody who could be creative. That was brand new for me. And I haven't looked back since.
When I'm picturing this right now, it's like my favorite thing of all time is Dead Poets Society. And this guy who's leading you on this journey is Robin Williams. There's so much. Who's this guy to you? Was he a teacher, a guy at church, a local community? Because that's a special person to do that for you guys and take you guys on that journey and unlock those things for you. And I cannot get but awesome Dead Poets vibes from that.
It's major Dead Poets vibes. In
So
fact, we
good.
watched that movie as a group that year. So that's tangled in this story as well. But yeah, he was a guy who was connected to the local church that we were part of tangentially, not like deeply connected, not a staff member, not even he was brought in to lead this group of senior guys and did it in a really unique new way. And so we called it the Sacred Circle. We would literally back our trucks and cars up in the circle in the parking lot at night and just read our journals back and forth and talk about these big questions we had or things that were unresolved in our minds and in our hearts and through this whole year. And he led us through these rites of passage that he had built out for the year. And what's really, and again, this is the book. The book is based on this true story. It's not a carbon copy of it, but it's very much based on this story. But yeah, he led us through these rites of passage that he built out. And what's really cool about this, and for a lot of different reasons, is that it was 1 year and then it was another year and then another year. And so this thing lasted, what he built that year lasted another 18 years. And so we always had this dream of, at the end of that year, we were thinking, how cool would it be if kids that are being born right now went through the Sacred Circle thing that we did? And that took place. And so last year, I went to the 18th year and hung out with these guys that were literally born that same year that we had been talking about them.
That's amazing. I have a 17-year-old son right now.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
So I'm hearing this. I read One Night in 1,000 Years and loved it. And so I read it on my Kindle or like app. And so I want a physical copy. Are there physical copies?
There are, yes.
Okay. I need to get one because I want to put it in
Right.
his hands. I'm going to take Kent because I can get it faster.
Right.
But I just think about my son and even just how that experience that you had that opened up this whole world for you, that you never even thought that you would be a writer. You didn't even have an inkling that was something that you would do. How the mentor, he made and shared what was on his heart. He brought these guys together. He shared what God had put in him to create, and that spilled over onto you. And I'm like, I want this for my son too. So I love how he didn't just share it with you guys with it just to end on y'all, but it would be multiplied. And so I'm so excited about this book. And even I don't want to get too far ahead in this story, but what might be coming, because I think with this generation of teenage boys in particular, that's what I have. I have 2 girls and a teenage boy. I think about this, what they want is this call into an adventure and just having men lead them in that. And I love how he led because it wasn't very conventional. Can you speak more to that? Like,
Yeah, not conventional. Yeah, to say the least, not conventional. I had grown up in church and had been in some of these kinds of groups before, kind of small group, youth group type things, where it's pretty traditional. It's like Bible study. You're given the answers, and which is great. I think there's definitely a place for that. But at that time in life, I think at 17, at 18, when you're transitioning to manhood, you need something a little different. I think you need to be handed responsibility for what you believe in a way that you're going to carry it with you or not, to be honest. And so that's what he did. So it was never, hey, this is the answer. This is what to think. This is the place you should go. That was the opposite of how he led the group. It was very much questions in what do you think? Why do you think that? What if that's not true? And that would drive you crazy at times, but that's exactly what I think guys that age need, is not to be fed these answers, but to be invited into something maybe that they never experienced before. And that's what he did. And it takes a lot of intention to do that. That doesn't happen by accident, like you were talking about. He led the group intentionally in that way, maybe even fighting against his instincts. I don't know. We could ask him if he ever wanted to guide us in a more direct way, but he intentionally led the group in that way. And that's what made it so special.
Love it. So when you look back on that experience before we flash forward, like, what are you like most proud of in terms of going through it? Not in a noble way of pride, like just when you reflect back on that time, like what stands out to you the most?
I think back, I've thought a lot about my journey that kicked off my journey as a writer, as an artist, as a creative. And I think what I'm most proud of in that kind of bigger story is just that I haven't quit yet. And so I'm proud of that. And I think that's been through ups and downs, like hardcore freelance years, no money, nobody caring about the things that you're doing. I've been through that whole journey many times over. And so I'm proud that I'm here now and I haven't quit yet. And I think that never would have happened if I hadn't been given this vision where it's like, you can create something that means more than attention, or means more than approval, or means you're thinking in these bigger ways where you're creating for eternity as opposed to creating for whatever's going to happen today. And so that foundation was laid, I think, during that time in the group. And so now, as being older and with kids and with a family and with all these different responsibilities, I'm still doing this work, but because that foundation was built for me back then.
Yep. Man, that's good. And that will take us to fast forward. And just, we want to talk specifically on this episode of what you've made and shared of One Night in 1,000 Years. So in this case, your formative story is obviously tied right to this creation. Sometimes that may not happen with our guests, but it is for you. So set it up. But so you go through what you just said, a lot of hard times in writing and times where there's not any sort of tangible, maybe, reward that you're experiencing. It's internal rewards.
Yeah.
And you're continuing to create and make and build a career. So what was that point where you decided, I want to go back to this time when I was 17 and try to write a story about that? What was the spark that was like, I want to go for this and create this as a fictional story?
I don't remember the exact spark. I think so after that year, my life has gone on these two different tracks where I've got and writing has opened the doors to both of them. But on the one hand is more of a traditional job. And I have had more normal jobs, 9 to 5, or consistent freelance clients, that kind of world where I write for a living. And then there's this other side that's creative projects that maybe make no money at all, and that's okay. And so these two worlds exist, they coexist all the time. And so as I'm thinking through what projects I want, or maybe I should say I need to do over here, that has always been a story for me that was like, man, that was such a impactful story for me personally. And so probably 7 years ago, I wrote the first words of that as just exploring. I wrote like maybe a passage or two, just seeing what it would be like to dive back into that. And because it was so personal, I had to think through, okay, how do I want to tell this story? Do I write a script? Do I do a documentary that's about the actual story? Do I write a nonfiction book? Is it a short story? I thought through all these different channels of how I could tell the story, and ultimately landed on this novel, a first person coming of age novel, just because I felt most comfortable doing that. And also being able to take license with, as fiction, you can take license and build the story in different ways, that for narrative effect and all these different reasons. But also I felt like I could tell the story and get to the truth of the story, maybe even better through fiction than I would have telling it in a more nonfiction, straightforward way. So about 7 years ago, wrote the first words, sat on it for a long time, never really developed it. And then working on these other projects at the same time, and then wrote a draft, didn't feel great about it. There's a whole story of trying to sell it at one point with agents in the publishing world that's we can get into or not get into. But then probably 3 years ago, I got really serious about it and sat down and really built it and finished it out.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just as you were sharing, because I agree. I think there are ways that you can get to truth through a narrative, like a fiction narrative instead of like nonfiction. And I'm curious, why do you think that? Why do you think that tends to be true?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's true.
You don't have to have the answer.
It's true for me. I think there are themes that came out of that year that in passing, you could easily pass over them if it's just moment after moment after moment.
Yeah.
But fiction allows you to stop on that theme and really develop it and build it and see how it's unfolding in other people at the same time. Then maybe I wouldn't be able to do nonfiction. And you can create characters and scenes that really highlight those things. And so I think that having that ability can really just bring out the things you really want to bring out.
Yeah. I think it did. And I think it was really effective. So
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah. So when you sat down to, it's 3 years ago, to like really get serious about it, what sort of, I guess, were there fears? Were there the obstacles that had to that point? It might have just been time, life, all the things that make this kind of work hard to do. But what was it for you in making it and that part of the journey that was challenging? And again, what got you in that 3 years ago just to be like, I'm sitting down and doing this and knocking it out?
There's probably two things that I would say to that. So one of them is that this was a real story that impacted hundreds of guys and their families. And so anytime you're going to take on a story like that, you have this kind of built-in judgment. And I don't mean judgment in a bad way, but you have these people who are going to see it and say, I was a part of that. That is not the way it was, or that's exactly the way it was, or I hate it. I love it. So you have this kind of built-in like check, the system of checks and balances in your head at all times. Is this really what I want to say here to all these guys who are really deeply invested in it? So that was I wouldn't say that was a fear, but it was something that I was constantly aware of. The second fear is that anytime you're writing or thinking or telling a story about something that really happened to you that was impactful, you want to see it clearly. You want to be able to look in the rearview mirror and not put a shine on it that wasn't really there. Or I forget what it's like, golden age thinking. It was so great back then. And so I wanted to tell the story in a way that felt real enough where I wasn't just like deluding myself about what happened and doing injustice to the story by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. And those are real things that it's different than just a completely fictional story where no one knows who these people are. I think I told you that I was sitting with a woman who wants to write kind of a memoir, but she's stuck between that and writing fiction. And that was her challenge. It's just, if it is based on my true story, I don't know how these people are going to receive it.
Right.
And for her in the journey right now, she just wasn't ready to cross that threshold. That's partly why I wanted to ask you just like what that was that just helped you get over that space.
I also worked hard with that. I worked hard to not copy over specific people. I think that the character who's the most like the real character is Lucas, who led the group, and he's Jonathan, who's been deeply invested in this book all along. Great guy. But the other characters in the story are pretty much made up. I might have pulled little fragments of things here and there, but you can't look at a character and go, oh, that's, and that's, and that's. So I was very intentional to do that as well.
Yeah. Man, I really want Wayne to have just been a guy that you knew.
Me too. I would love to run away, but I didn't.
He's great.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's good. Lauren, Coop, I'll just leave some room for you guys to based on what you're thinking. If not, I'll move to my next questions.
Yeah, I'm processing. Keep going, Kent. You're doing great.
I was like, Coop's going to say something.
No, not yet. Not yet.
So what about, I'm always interested, Jonathan was a guide in real life at 17. And again, with all these generations later of young men that have now grown into men. What about, was there somebody that helped you? It probably was Jonathan again, like that helped you as a guide in writing this, that came alongside and that was a mentor? Or did you find that cobble that together from a lot of different sources?
It was cobbled together from a lot of sources. The main person would be Jonathan. Jonathan is a writer as well. And so that's something we've stayed connected with over time. Over the years, we trade pages. And so if he's working on a project, he'll send it to me. I'll edit. And now I owe him a certain amount of pages, or he owes me a certain amount of pages. So we did that for years and years, where I would send this story to him and say, here's those pages you owe me. Can you edit them and send it back? So he read it. He's read this book, I don't know, 10 times. But yeah, there were other writing groups and other people that I was bouncing this story off of. As far as an actual writing mentor, not really. The closest thing would be him, just because he's been invested in that part of my life for such a long time. So he probably him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How do you set, or do you set any kind of expectations for a project like this? So you're working on it for years. This was part of your life. It's getting close to being finished. As a creative, someone who's done a lot of creative projects, do you set expectations for success for you? Like, what would make this a successful project to you? One person reads it. I want it to provide enough money to make the next book. Do you set those, or do you just let it go and it is what it is?
I honestly just let it go and it is what it is. I probably should. I probably should set expectations, to be honest, but I don't. And there's probably something psychological in me that I need to face and deal with there, as far as being willing to face failure and success, that I just would rather not in that regard. But the way that I have operated for a long time is that with this, you remember I talked the two different doorways. It's like my creative career. Yes, I need to be successful there, or I'm going to get fired and I'm not going to make money and people aren't going to read the thing that they paid me to make. So that's different. I need feedback there. I need metrics there, all of that. But with this other side, that's more creative work, I have always operated in a way that's, I don't care, honestly. Like, I'm doing this for me and more than I am for an audience even. And so I feel like if I served the vision and was like obedient to the calling for this specific project, then I did my job. Now that doesn't always lead to a lot of sales, just so we're all clear, but it is a way that I can do the work and feel fulfilled in it, where this is what I set out to do. It's a 30-page short story that's odd. No one's going to read it. That's fine. I set out to do this. I was obedient to what I wanted the project to be, and I did it. And so that has been my mentality all along. I think obviously I want to sell books. Like, that would be amazing. I want to do that. I want 1 million people to buy this book, and I hope they do. But that's never I never go into it with that kind of standard for success or failure.
How do you dedicate time to do that kind of work? And then what I can hear, you're already motivated to finish it, but do you have a timeline, or it's just when it's done?
Yeah. A few years ago, before kids, it was different. So I have two little girls. I got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so 8 years ago, writing was different for me because I could do it. I was married then, but I could still, a lot of flexibility. On an evening, I could go write for 4 hours and it's not a big deal. But when you have kids, things shift in great ways. But I was finding that there was this window where I wasn't able to do the work that I really wanted to do. And I was really frustrated by that, 'cause I wasn't turning out these projects that I really wanted to tell. And so I literally just looked at a 24-hour day. It's like, where do I have any margin at all? And the only margin was before everyone wakes up in the morning. Yeah. And so I made this shift, which I didn't want to do. And I'm not a great habit guy, but I did build this habit where every morning before everyone wakes up, I'm in my office writing. And so that's where I found the time to develop these things. And so I write 6 days a week like that. I take one day off, and it's usually about an hour and a half or 2 hours in the morning. And the volume that has come out of that over 8 years is a massive amount of work. And so now a lot of the problems I'm dealing with, like, what do I do with all of this stuff that I'm creating now?
That's a good problem.
Man. No, you're speaking my language, brother. I love it. I try to teach my girls that discipline can really breed creativity.
Yeah.
And I think it's the Maya Angelou quote, creativity is the only thing that you don't run out of the more you use it. And so to me, my life exploded when I decided to start writing every single day.
Yep.
Anything, or drawing, like something every single day. And then things just exploded. Now, like you, I have hard drives of stuff that you're like, okay, when I die one day, someone's going to find this stuff and be like, this dude was insane. But that's where, I don't know, it's like a faucet that for me, it's easier to turn on and leave on than off and on every couple of months.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And there are a lot of mornings where you walk into the office and you're just like, I don't have it today. I'm not there. I can't get to the depth that I want to get to. I'm not feeling it. But you just get going, and it's like inspiration can meet you. If you show up, it's going to show up too. That's my mentality is, if I just show up, something will happen. But I got to show up.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yep. So tell me what you like. It's a hard day. You're in there. It's early in the morning. Nothing's coming. No depth. No wonder. It's just not, the muse isn't there. What do you do? What do you start typing?
I literally just start working on it. And I might write 8 bad sentences that I delete right after I write them, but I just get going. I just start working. And then eventually something clicks and something else clicks, and you leave the day with something there that wasn't there the day before.
Yeah, that's a great line. I love that. Tell me about we talked a little bit about this, but as you were trying to architect the story, what are some of the tools you used? How did you try to synthesize all of this? Because again, it has a lot of meaning for you, emotion. So how did you, in the narrating way, like rise above all of that to tell this story? What was helpful for you in that?
Do you mean specific tools?
Yeah, specific tools. Yeah.
So for this project, I think I told you this, Ken, but I built it on a beat sheet, a film beat sheet. And I knew that this would be a more commercial project than a lot of the other kind of work that I've done. So some of the other projects are not meant for a wide audience. Like I was talking about, they're meant for me, and I hope an audience connects with them. But this book was a little different just because, one, there's a built-in audience of all these guys, but also I think the story has such a wide appeal. Like you were saying, your 17-year-old son, I think there's a lot of 17-year-old sons out there that might connect with this story. And so I wanted to be more commercial and structured in a more commercial way. And so I used a 40-point beat sheet that I have used before for things, but it created a very clear, okay, here's act 1, here's your setup, here's what's going to happen to move into act 2. And so I just built it out in that way and then wrote to those beats. And so even when you read the book, people read it and they're like, oh man, it felt like a film. I could just see it when I was reading it. So yeah, because I wrote it like a film so that it read that way. And the chapters are short. They end with something that moves you very intentionally into the next chapter. And I think that how that helped me deal with the story, thinking of it in acts probably helped me deal with the story. I experienced it personally. So I didn't think of that year in acts. Oh, act 1 of my senior year was this. So I'm not reflecting in that way. But when I built this story, it's like, okay, this character, this lead character, act 1 would be like this. Act 2 would be like this. Act 3 would be like this. And yeah, I think that helped me. It kept the story on the tracks.
Yeah, that's good. So how long, was about 3 years ago that you were serious about it? Did it take, I guess it took about 2.5 years to like really get to the bottom of it?
Yeah. And I don't know how many pages I wrote that no longer exist, but I wrote drafts and drafts, cut it down. At one point, I think it was probably 80,000 words at one point. And now it's probably closer to 40,000 words. And so I wrote a lot, cut a lot. There are scenes that were built in that I thought were really great. And then you step away for a minute and come back and it's like, oh, I actually don't need this scene at all. I'm going to throw away this 4 weeks of work that I did. And so that's part of the process, I guess, but I like where it landed.
So did you use an editor in this process, or was this self-edited and you, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I had editors that worked through it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
That's the thing that I've never, that's the thing I've never had to do primarily as a musician. We don't let people edit. But I've always been fascinated by that on the writing side, because when we were do screenplays, obviously people would read them and give you feedback, and there'd be an editor towards the end. But that always blows me away, writing, when someone else can come alongside and help you cut it down. And for me, that's a really wanted thing, because I know I'm getting to the 80,000 words and I'm going to get there quick. And if you don't stop me, I'll put 100,000 words on it just because I can. And it doesn't need it at all. And so I'm always fascinated by a real writer, like especially writing a story and the role of and the partnership with an editor and how that works. Because what if they came back to you and wanted to chop something and you were like, absolutely not?
That does happen. I think with any creative work, with any creative project, you get too close to it in some ways. And you can't see what you can't see. And then you step away and someone points something out and it's raw to hear that. But then a week later, it's maybe there was something to that. And so that always happens. I think it's like a muscle. The more you get used to that, the less it hurts for someone to say that about your work, or to say you need to cut, this character's not interesting, or you need to cut the scene. And you thought this scene was great and the character was really interesting, but then you realize, oh, maybe they were right. I was too close to it. And so that happens all the time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
that was the question I was going to ask, was because I think that's really insightful, that the more that you do it, the less it hurts. Maybe there's some scar tissue that builds up that's actually beneficial. Because I would just be like, oh, that hurts. And I spent all that time. That's really encouraging to hear, just to like being too close to it. I think it's kind of feels like you're cutting out one of your kids, but really you're not. It's not that important. And there's something greater happening. So
I also write a lot. And so I've done I think the more projects that I've done too, if this was my one project that I'm ever going to do in my life, a lot of people think of their book that way. So this is going to be my masterpiece. And maybe then you're even more close to it and you're even less open to feedback. But I think when your life is building these projects and telling stories, it's like, there's another one on the horizon. There's another one after that. There's another one after that. So I'm thinking about, like, I like to think of the masterpiece mentality. It's like the masterpiece is your whole body of work at the end of your life.
Yeah.
That's the masterpiece. It's not one project that was your masterpiece. It's the accumulation of all this obedience, I would say. It's like the obedience at the end of a life. That's the masterpiece. And so when you can break free of that masterpiece thinking, it's a lot easier to let things come and go.
Yeah. Amen. So now you've made it in this part of the way we talk about it. And there's the sharing part of, okay, what does it look like to share this? So help us with that. And I do want to hear as much as you're willing to share a little bit about, because I do think this is fascinating and frustrating, but I get it. of the process of some of the feedback you got in the marketplace. Would love to hit on that, but just overall, just the sharing part, what was that journey like?
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I'm a lot better at the making part than the sharing part. And so I probably have a whole lot to learn from this group about that part. And it's something that I want to get a lot better at, the sharing and the marketing. And you and I even talked about this at one point, but I can market. A lot of my work has been marketing other people's ideas and projects and products. But then when it comes to mine, there's some kind of block where I can't market myself. It's too weird. Yeah. So sharing it, and I'll go back. I mentioned this earlier, but I tried to sell this in traditionally and wound up publishing it through my company. I've got a company called Canawan that I do all my creative work through. Any film or any kind of project I get hired for, or a lot of these personal projects, I do it through this company that I have. But I was going to sell this book traditionally and had a Christian agent who I really loved, was great. And I sent it to them. They loved the book. They tried to sell it. And the feedback came back, this is too secular for a Christian market. It's like, oh man, okay. And they were like, we're going to try to sell it to the kind of the traditional publishers. They came back and they said, this is too Christian. You should take it to the Christian publisher. And it was like, oh man, I knew this was going to happen. Yeah. It's like the switchfoot of books where you're in between these two worlds.
You're speaking my language. I was told every band I've ever been in is too pop for Christian, too Christian for pop.
Yeah. So I came to that and had the option to write it one way or the other. So why don't you go back and you can choose, you can write it this way or write it this way, and then we'll go back out with it. And at that point, I've considered it, and I even played around with it for a minute in both ways, but it just felt so wrong. It just felt so wrong. So I tried to write it. And when I wrote it in the secular way, it's like, how do you take God out of a story like this? You just can't do it. And are they meeting like at the YMCA parking lot? Like, it doesn't make sense. It steals all the power from the story. And on the same side, if you wrote it where Lucas, the leader of these guys, is just like hitting him with the gospel every time they meet, that also steals the power from it in a totally different way. And so ultimately I was like, no, I'm going to stay true to the story. I'm going to be obedient to what I felt called to do, build it like this. And so I wound up publishing it through my company and that's how it came to be.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you had changed the different parts, it would have taken from the story. And so I'm really glad that you stayed dedicated to that.
Thanks. Me too.
Yeah. Put it out through your company and then it's out and about. And so you tell me about the sharing part, because I think a lot of people resonate with what you're saying. Some people it's more natural, but for a lot of us, that part can be hard to say like, all right, I want you to hear about this thing that I created because I do value it, but I don't want to feel self-promotional.
Yeah.
And one of the things we really want to do on this show is to not always talk about where it was successful, but where it's just super challenging. So for you, the making part, it seems a bit more natural. This part's where the sharing part's where you're jammed up. So I want to hear more about what is it that you just feel like, I have a hard time getting the word out and sharing.
I love this. I love talking to people, getting into the ideas, this is amazing. And I love doing this kind of stuff. But when it comes to selling, taking a picture, selling this, hey, everyone, go check this out. Something in me just fights back so hard against that. And I'm not saying that's healthy. I actually think there's something that that's a place where I need to grow in a healthy way, but I haven't really quite cracked that code yet. I have not had social media in years and years. I've avoided it. I actually just got an Instagram account this week for just to fight this in a way. And I still feel so strange about that and just promoting. I'd rather just talk to somebody face to face and they say, what do you do? I write books, and just do it like that. So I don't know how to do that in a healthy way. I wish I did. Honestly, I think I would sell a lot more books if I did, but I have not figured that out yet. That's my honest answer.
It's interesting. I'm learning so much from you about writing because I've written a book, and part of what I struggled with writing it was because it drew me away from meeting with people because I just have coffee with people. I kind of can mentor or just am a friend. And I felt like if I'm drawn away from that to write this book, it seems like a waste of time. It doesn't seem like what I really want to do. But then it's like I saw, okay, if I sit down to read this book, it's almost in a way like having coffee with thousands of people instead of just a handful of people. And so to just maybe encourage you or give you perspective on the marketing piece as I think keep doing the talking to people and getting to share the story behind the story, but also hopefully I want it out there seeing it as, okay, I'm going to multiply the effect. So I can do this in one place and it reaches thousands, maybe tens and hundreds of thousands of people that just me talking through things might not. Just to encourage you in that, because I want to see it do well. I see it like impacting, in particular, 17-year-old boys, and maybe even waking up some 20-something guys are like, I want to be a Lucas. I want to gather some guys around and do it differently. And so I see it not just, oh, that's a great story, but really impacting lives. So I think go for it.
And I think
Get uncomfortable.
I think that's what I need to get to. It's the heart behind it. It's the intention.
Yeah.
If the heart behind it is to sell books, then it's just going to always feel wrong. But if the heart is that you believe in this message, you think other people are going to believe in this message and it's going to benefit them in some way, like that's a different mindset than I want to get out there. I want to get attention. I want to get engagement. That's a totally different mindset than I think this can lift people up in a powerful way. And
Absolutely.
so that's really helpful to hear you say that. Even that making that shift is probably the shift to make.
Mm.
The way I look at it from a music standpoint and Instagram and getting it out there is with digital music and streaming now, it's the Wild West. There aren't record labels that are putting everything together and telling us who we can listen to and who's in the music stores. I can record something today and it's in Spotify tomorrow.
Right.
So I imagine books there's just so many ways now to digest a book and it's everywhere. And so you have to somehow put something out there. And it's usually through social media of like how these people are finding these bands, if it's YouTube to Instagram to SoundCloud. And you almost have to be in a couple different places just so people will find your CDs in stores.
Yeah.
Otherwise, now more than ever, it can just get lost in the shuffle of nothing, which is really frustrating. But then someone put it to me this way. I'm 45. So for 30 years in this business, in the music business, when it started, we were dying for a channel of content. What would we have done to be in a commercial or be on MTV? Now with social media, we have our own channel.
Yeah.
And YouTube, we have our own channel. And we are the program directors. And we can say and teach and talk about whatever we want as much as we want. And so they say a lot of people in my generation aren't using it because it's weird to us and it's uncomfortable. But they're like, man, it's what you've wanted your whole life to talk about your art. You don't have to push to sell product. But who are you? What else do you like to do? What are you working on? What are some behind the scenes? How can you challenge others to spur them on to write and join bands? And I don't know, it was a interesting way for me to have to twist it because every second I'm on social media, I feel like something dies a little bit. And then when I walk away from it, it grows back, but I have to do it.
Yeah.
And it's such a beauty.
In a big way.
Yeah. And hey, I also want to congratulate you because I think you did something that a lot of us talk about, and it's almost like a writing prompt that I've used before of write the book that your 18-year-old self needs to read or would want to read.
Oh, I definitely did that because I would have loved.
Yeah. Yeah, you nailed it. This book, it's a good book now, but man, if I'd have had a book like that in my senior year in high school when I was probably even more disgruntled and grumpy than I am now. Somehow, I don't know how I did it, but I did it at 18. Oh man, I needed this book.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
good.
And yeah, we'll finish with this is just that part of you sharing it is then Jonathan shared it on Instagram, and Jonathan and I are friends. And so I see it and I'm like, yeah, I want to read a book about this because I was not as involved as Craig and those guys that year. But in a long story, too long for this podcast, was Jonathan was doing similar. I don't know if it's mentorship because I'm older than he is, but it was help. It was a lot of just Jonathan being Jonathan, which is bringing people in that are on the outside, seeing uniquely how God has made people and celebrating that and encouraging that and really stirring up wonder. He just has such a gift for stirring up wonder in people. And so just doing that for me in a hard time. So when I saw that there was a book that was capturing the sacred circle and this whole journey, I have to read that. And did, and it was a very emotional experience for me because of pretty much everything we've talked about, that it as somebody was 44 reading it, it did bring me back to 17, 18. First, that was number one. And then number two, it brought me back to early 20s where I was just in a hard time going through a divorce and just feeling lonely, and just there was a lot that was happening. And so I was brought back to that space and that time. And so I read it and I'm like, man, I've got to dig into this. So did that work. And again, I'm trying to condense a long story, but ended up getting this book that was actually in one night that the Lucas is helping all these young men with writing, like Craig said, and then gets all of their work together and publishes it and puts, this isn't really a spoiler alert for it. It's just something that happens in the story that is really cool and helps, I think, all of these young men see themselves as creators and as authors and as something to bring to the world. And so I had that literal book in the version of real life that Jonathan had given me from that year. And so went and opened it up and was reading through what he wrote to me in an inscription that's always been like an Ebenezer. You can't see it. It's behind me, but I don't want to try to mess with my camera and all that because it'll just go bad. But it's behind me still. You can see like there it is. Actually, that's the simplest way to see it. I keep it right there as like an Ebenezer for me of creating. And it's been there wherever I've been for 14 years or so, probably. But on the backside was a clip that I used to just hold Jonathan's Ebenezer part in place so the pages didn't fall over, is why it was there. And so it just been there for a long time to where there's like an imprint in the pages. And so I'm like, I wonder what's on the other side of this. So I just start reading it and I see a C.S. Lewis quote. It's meaningful that I'm reading the words of this poet that's in the pages, and just it resonates for me at the time, where you just feel seen by God and just a meaningful love of the Father. And I'm like, how crazy would it be if the author of these words was Craig? That'd be a lot of coincidences. And if it is, I don't know what to do with that, but I don't know. So I'm like flipping, and all of a sudden I get to that title page and it's Craig S. Cunningham. And as I've said in a longer post on this, like I just start crying because I honestly don't know why. I think you're just, when you feel seen by the Lord in a very intentional way, it's powerful. And that's just what it was. It just was that. And I don't know all of it. It may have been just simply, that may be the gift, right? Sometimes I think we want to take all these things and turn them. I want to take everything and turn it into something tangible. Partly what I wanted to do is just sit there and receive the gift, right? And that it was a sweet gift, like that I'll just always cherish. And so it makes an Ebenezer even more of an Ebenezer now. And so that happened. But then I did, because of the way I'm wired, was like, it should be a movie. It just should be. We've already made that clear.
Yeah.
I like to produce movies. I'm going to ask if anybody's making this movie already. And so I reached out to Jonathan and he was like, I don't think so. And would you mind if I shared this story with Craig? Sure, share it. He does. And so it really started a journey of me saying, hey, could I produce this movie with you, Craig? And could we get this into a script and try to get out into the world? I think it's just, it's a story that, as we said earlier, that so many young men, I think, would benefit from. And I really think not just people in their 20s that would be Lucas's age, but people my age that go, wait, I have all these young guys around me at my church or wherever I'm at. How can I pull them in? How can I be intentional about mentorship? And so my heart's into it. And so we've worked through that, and my company, Kent Studio, optioned the rights to try to get this made into an independent film. So that's the journey that we're on right now, is early stages, is to work through, okay, how do we produce this? Have some ideas, some strategies that we're starting to put in place in a project plan, but super excited and hopeful for it. So the sharing part, it was viewed Jonathan to Instagram to me reading it, and now on this journey of trying to produce a film. And so we'll see where it goes from here. There's, again, now we're going to try to make the film and share it. So a whole nother cycle starts. But anyway, that's the shortest I could possibly try to tell that story. So sorry that I rambled.
I love it. I love hearing it every time.
It's good.
Thanks. Yeah. I think that's for me, I know that's the journey I wanted to try to capture in this. Lauren, Coop, anything else from you guys?
I'm looking forward to you guys with the movie. Good luck.
Right.
Tell me if you need a soundtrack.
Kent's already has a Spotify playlist already going. Do you know this, Greg?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was one of the things that
It's
we
a great
actually, when we met, and first just sat down in Waco a couple of weeks ago now, and we're just talking through things, but you don't know, about vision for sure. Obviously there's resonance, but when you start into this, it's what are the songs that you're hearing is a great way just to say, are we on the same track with this? And so I'm showing him my playlist, and then I have one, of course, that I use as I wrote, and there was so much similarity that I was like,
Nice.
Yes, we see this the same way. So
good.
I'll put those in the show notes along with a link to buy the book and
Great.
some of the other things you've talked about. But that was really encouraging when we had that and had some of the same shared artists, because we were and are seeing it the same way.
I love it. It's a
It's
great
great.
playlist.
Well, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, no, I listen to it a lot as we're trying to do this. So cool. Coop, anything else from you?
Nothing from me. It was
All
a
right, man.
pleasure meeting you. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I loved it. It was great to be here. Thank y'all for taking the time and talking about the book. I love talking about the book. I had a great time.
Cool. Hey, thanks everybody for joining us. Like I said, I'll put all those links in the show notes so it's easier to get to those. And we'll see you next time on Make It, Share It.
You see here, kid? You gotta just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before. You just gotta bend your knees, take a deep breath, and jump. And you might think, what if I fall? Well, what if you don't?